The faint hum of rain outside Portland filled the silence of the Dawsons' bedroom. Jessica stood before the mirror, smoothing down the hem of a black dress speckled with subtle shimmer. It wasn't extravagant, but it made her feel elegant, almost like the woman she used to be before life turned into a list of doctor appointments and hormone pills. She turned slightly, trying to decide between her nude heels and the glossy black pair. For a brief moment, she smiled at her reflection, imagining how proud Michael might be to see her looking this way tonight. The door creaked open. Michael leaned against the frame, his tie loose around his neck, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You really planning to wear that?" he said, voice coated in mock amusement. Jessica turned toward him, caught off guard. "Why? What's wrong with it?" He let out a low chuckle. "You look like you wrapped yourself in a garbage bag. Pencil skirts aren't meant for, well, people who've been skipping the gym." Her smile vanished. "I've gained a little weight because of the medication, Michael." "My doctor said—" "Medication," he interrupted, shaking his head. "Sure. Or maybe it's the midnight sandwiches. You keep pretending I don't notice. You think a pill's gonna fix what you keep stuffing back in." Jessica froze. The sting of his words was sharper than she expected. "I'm taking those because we've been trying to have a baby," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "You said that mattered to you." He straightened his tie, avoiding her eyes. "Yeah, well, maybe some things aren't meant to happen. And honestly, Jess, you don't have to overdo it tonight. It's a dinner, not a pity parade." For a long moment, she just stared at him, the man who once called her his miracle. Now he was a stranger, his tone colder than the November rain outside. She turned back to the mirror, pressing her trembling hands together to stop them from shaking. Her reflection blurred as her eyes filled with tears. In the silence, fragments of her past came rushing back. The small apartment in Eugene with peeling wallpaper, her mother cleaning houses to make rent, her father's bitter silence after losing another job. Jessica had sworn she would never live that life again. She had studied until her eyes burned, worked 2 part-time jobs to afford tuition, and walked across that graduation stage believing she'd finally escaped it all. That's when she met Michael Dawson, a client at the accounting firm where she'd just been hired. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who made promises sound like guarantees. He took her to restaurants she'd only seen in magazines, bought her flowers just because, told her she deserved everything good in the world. And she believed him. When he proposed, she thought she'd found safety, love wrapped in a steady voice and a strong hand. But now, that same voice could undo her with a single sentence. Michael adjusted his jacket, checking his reflection beside hers. "Anyway," he said, as if their exchange were nothing more than small talk, "I'll be late. Important meeting at the restaurant. Don't wait up." He grabbed his keys and left without another glance. Jessica stood there, staring at the closed door. The silence pressed down on her chest, heavy and suffocating. She looked at her reflection again, at the woman who had fought so hard to climb out of the mud, only to be told she didn't shine enough. The rain outside grew louder, beating softly against the window, and somewhere beneath that sound, her heart whispered something she hadn't dared admit aloud, that maybe the worst kind of loneliness was the one that lived right beside the person you loved. When Jessica first married Michael, she believed she was joining a family, not stepping into a hierarchy. The Dawsons' home in Lake Oswego was elegant and cold, filled with glass, chrome, and the faint scent of lavender polish that clung to Agnes Dawson's every move. Michael's mother had the posture of a queen and the tone of someone who never lost an argument. From the moment she met Jessica, her smile had carried the softness of a blade. "Oh, so you're the young lady from Eugene," Agnes had said at their first dinner together, her eyes flicking over Jessica's simple dress. "Michael did say you were independent. That's admirable. Though, of course, Some women don't need to work once they're properly married. At the time, Jessica had laughed nervously, taking it as awkward humor. But over the years, those little remarks became the quiet poison that seeped into her every day. Even after Jessica started helping Michael run his small real estate firm, Agnes found ways to twist every success. When Jessica landed a major client, Agnes said it must have been because some men just like pretty faces signing their contracts. When the company bought a second office downtown, Agnes suggested Michael was the one carrying all the weight while his wife played accountant. Jessica bit her tongue through it all. She didn't grow up with luxury or status. Her mother used coupons and prayed the car would start each morning. But she had pride. Pride in the life she'd built, in how hard she'd worked to stand beside Michael as an equal. Still, Agnes never let her forget she wasn't born into their world. "Money has a smell, dear," she once told Jessica while folding napkins for a dinner party. "People can tell when it doesn't come from your own family." The word stung, but Jessica smiled politely the way she always did. She told herself that one day, if she and Michael had a child, things would change. A grandchild, she thought, might soften Agnes's edges. It might make them a family. But the months turned into years, and every negative pregnancy test felt like another brick on her chest. Her doctor prescribed hormone therapy, telling her there was still hope. The side effects came quickly: swelling, headaches, restless nights, and the slow betrayal of her own reflection. Agnes noticed first. "You've put on some weight, haven't you?" she asked one afternoon, pouring tea like she was conducting a sermon. "I do hope it's not stress eating. Men don't find that appealing after a while." Michael laughed weakly beside her, not meeting Jessica's eyes. That was how it began. Little jokes, disguised as motherly advice, repeated at every dinner, every phone call. "Don't wear fitted dresses, sweetheart. Accentuates the wrong areas. Try to smile more. You've looked so tired lately. Michael, darling, maybe you should take her somewhere nice. A gym, perhaps." Each comment left tiny cuts that no one else could see. At first, Jessica tried to fight for normalcy. She decorated their house, planned weekends away, cooked Michael's favorite meals, but he was always distracted. Agnes called constantly, just to check in, her voice sugary sweet, while undermining Jessica with every word. "Don't be too hard on her," Agnes would say when Jessica was within earshot. "She means well. Some women just aren't built for the pressures of a real marriage." Jessica began to recognize the distance in Michael's eyes, the same dull glaze that came whenever his mother's voice filled the room. It was as if Agnes had built an invisible wall between them, brick by brick, word by word. Still, Jessica stayed, not because she was weak, but because she believed. She believed that love could still mend what pride and venom had broken. She believed that the child they were praying for would fill the hollow silence at their dinner table. And every night, when Michael rolled over and muttered a distracted goodnight, Jessica whispered to herself the same promise she'd made since she was a girl, that no matter how cruel the world became, she would keep fighting for a family of her own. The restaurant shimmered beneath the glow of chandeliers, all gold light and soft jazz. Jessica had spent weeks planning the evening, Michael's 40th birthday, determined to make it perfect. The tables were lined with white linen and wine glasses that caught every flicker of candlelight. She had chosen his favorite menu: steak, Cabernet Sauvignon, and the creme brulee he once said reminded him of their honeymoon in Napa. For a moment, she stood near the entrance of the private dining room, watching guests filter in, business partners in crisp suits, their wives draped in designer fabrics. Everyone looked like they belonged there, everyone but her. She smoothed the skirt of her navy dress and whispered to herself, "You're his wife. You belong here." When Michael arrived, applause rippled through the room. He looked radiant in his tailored charcoal suit, a man used to being admired. He greeted everyone with ease. his hand sliding onto Jessica's back just long enough to look affectionate. "You really outdid yourself," he said, voice low. "Let's just hope you didn't mess up the seating chart like last time." The words cut, but she smiled anyway. "Everything's perfect," she replied. "Happy birthday, Michael." As the night unfolded, Jessica waited for the right moment. When the cake was brought out, she stood and gently tapped her glass. The chatter faded, and all eyes turned to her. Her heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "I just want to say how proud I am of this man," she began, her smile trembling but sincere. "He's the hardest working person I know, and the most generous. You've built so much, not just a business, but a home. And I hope this year brings you everything you deserve." Polite applause followed. Jessica reached beneath the table and lifted a small velvet box. "I wanted to give you something meaningful," she said, handing it to him. "A symbol of strength and success." Michael opened it. Inside lay a silver collector's knife, its handle engraved with his initials. She'd ordered it from a craftsman months ago, knowing how much he loved rare items. But instead of gratitude, Michael let out a short, sharp laugh. "A knife," he said, holding it up for the table. "That's unique. Though I'm not sure I'll need it unless I decide to take up hunting." Laughter rippled around the room, thin and awkward. Jessica's cheeks burned. "It's engraved," she whispered, as if that detail might redeem it. "Oh, I see that," he said with mock admiration. "Guess I'll never forget my own name." The guests chuckled again, and that's when Agnes stepped in, voice sweet and venomous. "Oh, come now, Michael," she said. "It's thoughtful, dear, and perhaps she can give it to the cook after dinner for peeling potatoes." The room erupted in laughter. Jessica froze. She caught sight of a young woman sitting beside Agnes, a striking brunette in a scarlet dress, lips painted to match. The girl was laughing harder than anyone else, her manicured hand resting lightly on Michael's arm. Jessica knew her. Madison Reed, the daughter of one of Michael's clients, a real estate mogul known for his wealth and arrogance. She'd met the girl once, briefly at a networking event. She hadn't realized they were this close. Her vision blurred. The room spun. She murmured something about needing the restroom and left before her tears could fall. Inside the marble bathroom, she gripped the edge of the sink, staring at her reflection under the harsh fluorescent light. Mascara streaked her cheeks. "Hold it together," she whispered. "You won't give them the satisfaction." She dabbed her eyes, reapplied lipstick, straightened her shoulders, and forced herself back toward the dining room. But as she reached the hallway, the sound of hushed voices stopped her. Michael's voice, Madison's laughter. Jessica turned the corner, and her world shattered. Madison was pressed against the wall, Michael's hands on her waist, their mouths locked in a kiss that reeked of everything Jessica had feared but refused to believe. Madison's laugh broke the silence. "You really think she suspects anything?" Michael smirked. "She's too busy playing housewife." Jessica's heart pounded. She stepped forward, her heels clicking like gunshots. "What the hell is this?" They froze. Madison blinked, then smiled, a cruel, perfect smile. "Oh, you must be the wife," she said softly. "Relax, sweetheart. We were just celebrating." Jessica's voice shook. "Celebrating what?" "My humiliation." Michael stammered. "Jess, it's not what it looks." But before he could finish, Jessica's palm struck his cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the hallway. Gasps rippled from the nearby tables. She turned, tears burning her eyes, and walked away, past the stairs, past the laughter, past the wreckage of the life she had built with him. And somewhere behind her, Madison's laugh rose again, bright, merciless, and unforgettable. The city was drowned in rain. Streets glistened beneath the orange streetlights, every puddle reflecting the fractured rhythm of the storm. Jessica ran without knowing where she was going, her heels slipping on wet pavement, her breath ragged. Her dress clung to her skin, the fabric heavy with rain and humiliation. Portland's nightlife buzzed faintly in the distance. The muffled thump of a bar, the occasional honk from a passing cab. But Jessica heard none of it. Her world had shrunk to the echo of Michael's laughter and the image of Madison's lipstick smudged across his collar. Her tears mixed with the rain until she couldn't tell which was which. The night blurred. She passed a bakery, closing for the evening, its warm lights fading behind frosted glass. Then a bus stop. Then a couple sharing an umbrella. She envied their stillness, the way they looked like they belonged somewhere. By the time her legs gave out, she was in a quiet residential street, lined with maples that glowed faintly beneath the street lamps, her hair plastered to her face. She sank onto a bench, pressing her cold hands against her stomach as if to hold herself together. For a long time she just sat there, the rain drumming against metal roofs and her heartbeat loud in her ears. She felt small, invisible, the way she had as a child, hiding from her father's shouting in their tiny apartment in Eugene. She thought she had escaped that world, but somehow she had built another kind of prison. Jessica. The voice was soft, uncertain. She blinked through the rain. A tall man in a long coat stood a few feet away, an umbrella tilted over him like a dark wing. He stepped closer, squinting beneath the dim light. "Jessica Dawson?" he asked again. She stared at him, confused, until his features came into focus, silver hair, kind eyes behind thin glasses. Recognition hit her like a warm gust in the cold air. "Dr. Lee?" He smiled, surprised and worried at once. "Good heavens, it is you. What on earth are you doing out here at this hour? You're drenched." I didn't know where else to go," she murmured. Without hesitation, he slipped the umbrella over her head. "Then come with me. You'll catch your death out here." They walked in silence, his steady footsteps guiding hers. Within minutes, they reached a small craftsman-style house tucked behind a cluster of pine trees. Inside, it smelled of cedar and old books. A fireplace crackled to life as he draped a blanket around her shoulders and handed her a mug of steaming chamomile tea. Jessica sat on the couch, trembling slightly. Her mascara smudged like faint bruises. The warmth stung her skin after the cold. For a long while she didn't speak. Dr. Lee didn't push. He simply waited. The patience of a man who had listened to countless broken hearts over decades of teaching. Finally, her voice cracked the silence. "It's over," she whispered. "My marriage, my home, everything. He was with someone else. His mother hated me. And I kept thinking, if I could just be better, thinner, quieter, maybe he'd love me again." Dr. Lee leaned forward, his gaze gentle but firm. "Jessica," he said quietly, "you've spent your whole life trying to earn love by suffering for it. But love isn't meant to be earned. It's meant to be shared. Sometimes pain isn't punishment, it's the beginning of freedom." His words sank deep, wrapping around the hollow space inside her chest. She stared into the fire, watching the flames bend and twist like something alive. That night, Jessica stayed in the guest room, wrapped in a borrowed robe that smelled faintly of lavender soap. She didn't cry anymore. For the first time in years, she simply lay there, listening to the rain soften against the windows, and breathed without fear. Outside, the storm eased, and somewhere in the distance, morning began to break. Michael Dawson once thought he'd traded up a new wife, a new life, a world gleaming with marble floors and imported wine. Madison Reed's penthouse in downtown Portland was the kind of place people noticed. The kind of place that announced wealth before anyone spoke a word. But to Michael, it felt like living in a museum built for someone else's vanity. At first, it was intoxicating. Madison had that effect. All laughter, diamonds, and the faint scent of expensive perfume that lingered on every piece of furniture. She called him my handsome project, said he needed polish, bought him watches, suits, and shoes that cost more than his first car. He played along. convincing himself this was happiness. But slowly the glamour began to rot. Madison's laughter grew sharp. She started spending weekends in Palm Springs or Aspen without him, posting pictures of poolside cocktails while he sat alone at charity dinners. When he asked why she married him at all, she smiled and said, "Because it annoyed my father." Edward Reed, the father in question, was a man who carried contempt like a second skin. He'd made his fortune in real estate and had no patience for men he considered beneath him. From the beginning, he treated Michael like a parasite. "You were lucky she even looked at you," he once said over dinner, swirling a glass of whiskey. "Don't confuse proximity with belonging." Michael swallowed the insult, pretending it didn't hurt, but the word stuck. And as months passed, Madison's disdain began to echo her father's. "You should be grateful," she told him one evening, scrolling through her phone. "Do you think any of your little suburb women could have given you this life? You'd still be selling condos in Beaverton." Her tone made it sound like he'd been rescued from drowning, when in truth she was the storm pulling him under. When Madison discovered she was pregnant, everything shifted. She was furious. "This ruins everything," she shouted, throwing the test across the marble counter. "Do you have any idea what pregnancy does to your body?" Michael tried to reason with her, saying this could be their chance to start over, to have something real. But she laughed. "You think I'm giving birth just to make you feel like a man?" She called a clinic the next morning. Michael stopped her at the door. "Don't," he said quietly. "Please, don't do this." For a rare moment, she hesitated. Then, with an exasperated sigh, she dropped her purse. "Fine, you win. But you're taking responsibility for whatever mess comes next." That mess became his son, Lucas. When the baby was born, Madison refused to hold him. "He cries too much," she complained. "Get the nanny." Within days, she was back to her parties, her shopping, her meaningless trips. Michael, meanwhile, found himself staring at the crib, wondering how something so small could make him feel both terrified and alive. But even that sliver of purpose didn't last. Edward Reed had been watching him, waiting. When Michael finally told Madison he wanted to leave, that he couldn't live like this anymore, Edward smiled like a man who'd been expecting the confession. "Then you'll leave with nothing," he said. Within weeks, Michael's world unraveled. Edward used his connections to accuse him of financial fraud, embezzlement in one of the Reed family's shell companies. It didn't matter that Michael was innocent. The lawyers, the press, the humiliation, it all crushed him. When the gavel came down, Michael Dawson lost everything. He spent 2 years in prison, long enough to see the last of his illusions die. Madison never visited. Her father's influence ensured that he served his time, quietly forgotten. When he was released, his father had died of heart failure, his mother was living in a care home, and his name was poison in every business circle. He had no home, no job, no wife, only a box of old photos and the faint memory of the man he used to be. Somewhere out there, his son was being raised by a stranger. And as Michael walked out of the prison gates into the cold Oregon air, he realized that for the first time in his life, no one was coming to save him. Prison stripped away everything Michael had used to define himself. The suits, the watch, the title, the illusion of control. Days blurred together under the buzz of fluorescent lights and the clang of metal doors. His world shrank to a cell the size of his old walk-in closet, where time moved like syrup and regret was the only thing that kept him awake at night. At first, he was angry at Edward Reed, at Madison, at fate itself. But as the noise of resentment dulled, what remained was quieter, heavier. Jessica's face, the memory of her standing in that restaurant, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. He had thought he was too good for her patience, too clever for her love. Now, he understood what he had thrown away. Each night, when the lights went out, he replayed that moment in his head, her hand striking his cheek, the sound of it echoing louder than any prison door. It wasn't just shame, it was clarity. For the first time, he saw himself through her eyes, small, weak, and pitifully lost. 3 years later, when the gate finally opened and the cold Oregon air hit his lungs, Michael Dawson was no longer the man who had walked in. The world outside had moved on without him. His first stop was his parents' house in Lake Oswego. But the home was gone, sold months earlier to cover debts. His father had died of a heart attack the year before, and his mother, Agnes, was now in a nursing facility, her mind slipping further each day. She didn't even recognize him when he visited. She smiled vaguely, asked if he'd seen her husband, and told him dinner would be ready soon. Michael left before the nurse could ask if he wanted to stay longer. He found a small room for rent in a crumbling apartment near the industrial district, sleeping on a mattress that smelled faintly of mildew. He applied everywhere he could, warehouses, delivery companies, construction crews, but most places wanted a clean record. Eventually, a dock supervisor took pity on him, hiring him to load crates along the Willamette River. The pay was low, the work brutal, but the silence felt earned. One gray morning, a black car pulled up outside his building. Edward Reed stepped out, immaculate as ever, though the lines on his face seemed deeper. His voice was still sharp. "Your son," he said without greeting. "He's 4 now. Madison's gone." Michael's heart clenched. "Gone?" "She died 2 months ago," Reed said flatly. "Overdose. Cocaine and alcohol. The tabloids loved it." He paused, studying Michael's expression. "The boy is all that's left. I have no interest in raising him. Either you take him, or he goes to state custody." Michael was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Where is he?" A week later, he stood in the doorway of a sterile nursery, staring at a small boy clutching a stuffed bear. Lucas looked up, his eyes wide and uncertain. There was no recognition there, just confusion. Michael knelt, trying to find words, but all that came out was a whisper. "Hey, buddy, I'm your dad." Lucas hid behind the bear. The rejection stung more than any punishment Michael had known. But he reached out anyway, slow and steady, until the boy's tiny fingers touched his. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close to grace. Months passed. Michael learned how to make sandwiches out of whatever was left in the fridge, how to wake up before dawn and carry crates until his muscles screamed, how to quiet a child's nightmares even when his own wouldn't stop. Then, one night at the docks, he overheard a radio broadcast. Edward Reed had declared bankruptcy. His empire was gone, his name tarnished, his fortune eaten by lawsuits and debt. The mighty had fallen. Michael didn't smile. He simply looked at the sleeping child in his arms and thought, maybe this is what it means to start over. Not with wealth or forgiveness, but with nothing, and still choosing to live right. The sky over Portland was pale and cold that morning, washed in the soft gray light that always came after rain. Michael held Lucas's hand as they walked along the narrow street of the Alberta Arts District. The boy's fingers were small and sticky from the pastry he'd eaten earlier, and Michael found himself smiling at the mess. It was a rare thing, that kind of smile, quiet, unguarded. He hadn't had one in years. They were out searching for work. The dock contracts had slowed again, and most mornings lately Michael picked up odd jobs, unloading trucks, fixing signs, painting fences. Lucas followed him everywhere, his small steps echoing like hope behind him. When they passed the little bakery on the corner, Lucas tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, it smells good." Michael glanced through the glass window. Inside, sunlight spilled across rows of golden croissants and cinnamon rolls. A young woman stood behind the counter, laughing with a customer. For a second, he almost kept walking. But Lucas's eyes were wide, and his stomach growled audibly. Michael sighed, reached into his coat pocket, and felt 3 crumpled dollar bills. "All right," he said softly. "Just one." The bell above the door chimed as they stepped inside. The warmth hit them instantly, sweet, buttery, alive. Lucas's face lit up. Michael looked around, trying not to draw attention to his worn jacket and calloused hands. And then he froze. Behind the counter, arranging pastries on a tray, was Jessica. She looked different, but unmistakably her. Her hair was shorter now, tucked behind her ears, and her apron was dusted with flour. Her movements were calm, practiced, the rhythm of someone who had rebuilt her life piece by piece. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. Jessica turned and her eyes met his. The tray in her hands trembled slightly before she set it down. The air between them thickened with everything unsaid, the betrayal, the years, the ghosts of what they'd once been. Michael's voice came out rough. "Jess," she didn't move. Lucas peeked from behind his father, curious. "Daddy, are we getting cookies?" Jessica blinked, her expression softening at the sight of the child. "Of course," she said quietly. "What kind would you like?" Lucas pointed at a chocolate chip cookie nearly the size of his hand. She smiled faintly and handed it to him in a small paper bag. "That one's on the house," she added. Michael swallowed hard. "You don't have to. I know," she interrupted gently. He looked down, shame coiling through him. "I didn't expect to see you here." Jessica wiped her hands on her apron. "Life has a way of surprising us," she said. "Sometimes it gives back what we thought it took away." Lucas tugged Michael's coat. "Daddy, can I sit?" He nodded, and the boy went to a corner table, happily devouring his cookie. Michael stayed standing. "Jess," he said again, his voice breaking, "I know you don't owe me a word, but please let me say this." Jessica said nothing, only waited. "I destroyed everything," he began. "You were right about me. I thought money made me powerful. That love was something I could buy. But I lost it all, the house, the business, even my name. I spent 3 years paying for what I did. And I'm still paying now." His throat tightened. "All I have left is him. And sometimes when he smiles, I see a piece of you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I never stopped regretting." The bakery was quiet except for the faint hum of the oven. Jessica's eyes shimmered, but she stayed silent. Finally, she whispered, "You look tired, Michael." He laughed bitterly. "I suppose I am." "Sit," she said softly. "You both look cold." He hesitated, then took a seat at the corner table across from Lucas. Jessica poured 2 cups of cocoa, placing one in front of the boy and one before Michael. He stared at it like it was something sacred. Over the next few weeks, they returned, at first for Lucas's cookies, then for breakfast, then just because the warmth inside felt like sunlight after years of gray. Jessica never asked questions, never mentioned the past. But every time she slipped an extra muffin into their bag or waved goodbye with that quiet smile, Michael felt something uncoil inside him. One morning, Lucas looked up from his cocoa and asked, "Daddy, is she your friend?" Michael hesitated. "She used to be," he said softly. Jessica, standing nearby, smiled faintly. "Maybe she still is." And for the first time in a long, long while, Michael believed that light could find its way through even the thickest clouds. That forgiveness, like the scent of fresh bread, had a way of filling every corner of an empty room. It was a quiet afternoon in Portland, the kind where the rain only whispered against the windows instead of pouring down. The bakery had just closed, and the scent of fresh bread still lingered in the air. Jessica sat at one of the corner tables, hands wrapped around a half-empty cup of tea, staring out at the glistening street beyond the glass. The last few weeks had felt like a dream she wasn't sure she was ready to wake from. Michael and Lucas came almost every morning now, sometimes just to buy pastries, sometimes to sit and talk. Jessica had watched Michael change in small, almost invisible ways. He no longer filled silence with excuses. His eyes no longer darted with pride or shame. He listened more. He smiled at his son like it was the only thing that kept him breathing. And yet, each time he left, something inside her trembled, a mixture of longing and fear. She didn't know if she could ever open that door again. That evening, she walked through the drizzle to the same house with the cedar porch where she had once found shelter, Dr. Lee's home. The old professor answered the door with a familiar warmth. "Jessica," he greeted. "It's been too long." They sat by the fire, the same as they had years ago when she'd first shown up at his doorstep, drenched and heartbroken. The world had changed since then, but the sound of the rain on his roof felt timeless. Dr. Lee poured her tea and studied her face. "You've been carrying something," he said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes." Jessica exhaled. "It's Michael. He's different now. I see it. He works hard. He loves his son. He's lost everything that once blinded him." And yet she hesitated. "Part of me can't forget. Part of me still hears the laughter from that night, the humiliation, the betrayal." Dr. Lee nodded slowly, not interrupting. "I keep thinking," she continued, "forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back into your life. But when I see him, I don't feel hatred anymore, just something I thought had died." The professor smiled gently. "Jessica," he said, "forgiveness isn't a door you open for someone else. It's a window you open for yourself, to let the light in again." She looked down at her cup, steam curling in soft spirals. "But what if that light leads back to the same pain?" "Then you'll know you were brave enough to face it," he replied. "If you are happy without him, let him go. But if you still think of him, not out of anger, but out of quiet memory, then maybe you've already forgiven him without realizing it." His words settled into the room like soft rain. Jessica sat in silence for a while, listening to the faint hiss of the fire. And in that silence, something inside her loosened. Not a decision, but a recognition. Love had never really left her. It had only changed shape, hidden under years of hurt and dust. Later that night, she walked home through the damp air, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement. Her bakery windows glowed faintly behind her as she stood outside, phone in hand, heart racing. When Michael's voice came through the line, it was hoarse, cautious. "Jessica." She swallowed. "It's me," she said softly. "I'm not calling to talk about the past. She paused, breath trembling. "If you still believe in second chances, come by tomorrow. Not to apologize, just to start again." For a moment, there was only silence, then a sound she hadn't heard in years. Michael's quiet sob, raw and real, breaking through the static. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have no idea what this means." Jessica closed her eyes. The street was empty, the rain light as mist, and somewhere between sorrow and grace. She realized forgiveness wasn't about undoing the past. It was about finally choosing to live beyond it. The house above the bakery was small, 2 bedrooms, warm light, and the faint scent of vanilla and coffee that never seemed to leave the walls. When Jessica first offered it, Michael hesitated. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice quiet, as if afraid the question might break the spell of whatever fragile peace they'd built. Jessica nodded. "You both need a home," she said simply, "and I have too much space upstairs." That's how it began, without ceremony, without promises. Just an understanding between 2 people who had already been broken once and weren't sure if they could risk shattering again. Lucas adjusted faster than anyone expected. Within days, he had claimed the empty room facing the street, filling it with paper airplanes, crayons, and the kind of laughter that had been missing from both their lives. He followed Jessica everywhere, into the kitchen, out to the garden, even when she swept the front porch. One afternoon, as she handed him a warm muffin, he grinned up at her and said, "Thanks, Mom." The word hung in the air, soft but powerful. Jessica froze for a heartbeat, then smiled and brushed a crumb from his cheek. "You're welcome, sweetheart." From that day on, something in the house shifted. Every morning, the 3 of them opened the bakery together. Jessica kneaded dough, while Lucas arranged pastries on a display shelf and Michael brewed coffee. Sometimes, as she caught Michael watching her, the faint smile, the quiet awe in his eyes. She saw not the man who had once hurt her, but the one trying, day by day, to become someone better. The customers noticed too. "You make a great team," an old woman once said. Jessica only smiled. But one evening, the rhythm of their simple life broke. Michael came home pale and unsteady, his breath shallow. "Just the flu," he insisted, but within hours his fever climbed. Jessica sat by his bedside, sponging his forehead, her heart tight with a worry she hadn't felt in years. "Don't fuss," he murmured, voice hoarse. "You've done enough." She ignored him. "You once said the same thing about love," she whispered, wringing out the cloth. He opened his eyes, tired, remorseful, and full of something like gratitude. "I don't deserve this," he said. Jessica's gaze softened. "Maybe not," she said quietly, "but you've earned it." The fever broke sometime near dawn. Jessica had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still resting on his. When Michael stirred, he turned slightly, his fingers brushing against hers. She didn't wake, but her hand tightened instinctively, as if her body still remembered what her heart hadn't yet dared to say aloud. When the first light of morning slipped through the curtains, painting soft gold across the room, Michael lay still, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. Outside, the city was waking, the sound of a delivery truck, the distant call of a seagull over the river. He thought of everything he had lost, everything he had broken, and the miracle of what had returned. Jessica stirred, opening her eyes to find him watching her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she smiled, faint and real. "Morning," she said softly. Michael reached out, his voice almost a whisper. "Morning, Jess." The sunlight spilled over them both, warm and forgiving. And in that quiet room above the bakery, surrounded by the smell of bread and the laughter of a sleeping child in the next room, the past finally loosened its grip, making room for something new, something fragile, something whole. A year later, the rhythm of life had softened into something steady, almost tender. The bakery thrived, not because it was the busiest place in town, but because people came for more than pastries. They came for warmth, for the laughter that filled the small space every morning. Jessica and Michael worked side by side, their movements easy, their silences no longer heavy. On a spring afternoon, under a sky the color of faded silk, they stood in a small courthouse downtown. Lucas fidgeted in his new shirt, his hair combed neatly, a shy smile tugging at his lips. When the judge signed the papers, Jessica and Michael became husband and wife once more, not in the grand ceremony of the past, but in quiet certainty. Lucas clapped his hands as the judge announced, and the adoption is finalized. His name is officially Lucas Dawson. Outside, the breeze carried the scent of cherry blossoms from the park. Jessica turned to Michael, her voice soft. "We did it right this time," she said. He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes, "because this time we did it together." A few weeks later, they made a trip to the nursing home. Agnes sat in a rocking chair near the window, her hair silver, her gaze unfocused. She didn't recognize them, her mind adrift in a world where time no longer followed rules. When Jessica bent to adjust her blanket, Agnes smiled faintly and whispered, "You're kind, dear. My son used to have a wife like you once." Jessica's chest tightened, but she didn't correct her. "I'm sure she loved him very much," she said softly. For a moment, Agnes looked out the window as if trying to remember, then nodded, her eyes glassy. "Yes," she murmured. "I think she did." Jessica stood in silence, watching the frail woman who had once caused her so much pain. But what she felt wasn't bitterness, only compassion, quiet and unspoken. When they left, Michael took her hand without a word, his thumb brushing the back of her palm. There was nothing left to forgive. Life had already done that for them. Later that summer, Michael sold the old house, the one where ambition and pride had burned their marriage to ashes. The proceeds weren't much, but it was enough. "Let's go somewhere new," he said. "Someplace with light." They drove west to the coast, where the ocean spread wide and endless, the air tasting of salt and second chances. They rented a small cottage near Cannon Beach, its windows opening to the sound of waves. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, they had dinner on the porch, grilled fish, lemon pie, and a bottle of wine Michael had been saving for years. The light turned golden on Jessica's face as she laughed at something Lucas said, her hair catching the last of the sunset. When the boy ran off to chase seagulls, Michael reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. She frowned. "What's this?" "Everything that's left," he said quietly. "The sale from the house. I want you to use it for the bakery, for Lucas, for us." Jessica opened it and saw the check inside, neat and unassuming. But what mattered wasn't the number. It was the gesture, the surrender of pride. The final proof that the man before her was no longer the one she had left in the rain. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "You know," she whispered, eyes glistening, "people say you can't step into the same river twice." Michael smiled. "Maybe not the same river." Jessica's voice softened. "But sometimes, if you're lucky, you find the same current again." The tide rolled in, steady and forgiving. And as the first stars appeared over the water, the three of them sat in the fading light, not chasing redemption, not escaping the past, but finally, quietly at peace.